Hi, I'm Peter Boyles, of course, do the morning show right across the hall here at 710 KNUS, and this is the 5th episode of what we have dubbed the shoot, stealing from professional wrestling. Once again, to Dr. Julie McCallan at Cenegenics. You saved my life and you're saving the show. I truly mean this when I talk about her. When I went in to see her some 10 years ago, I was limping. I was in pretty bad shape, and I always thought I was in good shape, being sober, and I thought I was doing it right. And she tuned me up and fixes me up and remains my great friend, Dr. Julie McCallan. If you're thinking about some stuff, take a look at these numbers on the screen and give her a call. Well, we began this, and the man behind the screen is, of course, Mark Crowley, and I sold this on an idea. Let's do a poor man's Joe Rogan. And they have been amazing successes. And we started with Tom Tancredo, who put it out of the park. We've said, you know, when that show was over, Mark and I walked out in the hall. I said, tear it down. We're not going to do anything better. Dick Wadhams came on the show. Frank Duffy came on the show. Sean Duffy came on the show. And then last week, Rich Wyatt, Home from the Penitentiary, that's had thousands of views on that one. So when we thought about people to shoot with, this guy's name immediately came up. I got to tell you, I mean, there's no better guy in the world. Frank DeAngelis, who will also be in part of the history of what happened at Columbine High School, but it isn't so much that. Somebody once said, you know, when lemons are given to you, you make lemonade. Nobody better, the coach. I love this man. Thank you for getting up. I mean, you came through traffic to get here this morning.
Well, I listened to you until you go on later. I'm never going to sleep in.
The one and only. Ladies and gentlemen, the boss is here. And when we talk about Columbine and what happened, his name is always prominent, of course, and Frank DeAngelis. We've now gotten into this, and this is, we talk a little bit about it. We have these lunches, these legendary lunches. And I'm the guy that doesn't fit in. And we go back to North Denver. Talk about what that all means to you.
Oh, it's so important, so many fond memories. And I tease people now, I said, you know, people, they call it Highlands or Sunnyside, and people are paying about $250,000 more than they should be if they would have just said this is North Denver.
Yeah.
But there's so many fond memories, and every time we go back with Gary and Tom, we talk about growing up. And there was one that was really funny. He said his grandfather owned this midget grocery store, and I said, oh my God, I bought toilet paper from there, you know, and so it was just great.
Remember the time, was it Gary and Tom, and about making Tom take accordion lessons, and he was taking them from like Gary's uncle.
Right.
And this interplay of North Denver, ethnically Italians, although you're Sicilian,
yeah,
so you're the odd guy out.
Yeah, I'm on the wrong side of Federal, as they pointed out.
So we go and we have these lunches, and I roll. I mean, I kind of stay out of it because, I mean, I kind of grew up in neighborhoods like that, but I didn't fit into that neighborhood. Yeah. And then one time we did a tour, and you pointed stuff out, and then you pointed this out, and you said, all the houses are brick. Why?
It was just for protection and things at that point, you know. And I think back to when my dad and mom purchased the house, because originally they grew up, I was born, it was on about 35th and Pecos, and then they moved in with my grandma, and that was a big thing with the Italian families. My mom and dad, or my mom's mom and dad moved in the basement, and we lived up above.
I grew up with stuff like that.
And it was on 36th and T-Home, and I think they paid $12,000, and this was 1957. And so,
somebody once said because there was a fire, all the wooden places burned, and so they built brick.
Right, and they were brick, all very nice houses, you know, and a lot of them are still there. But where I grew up, they scraped it, and they put 2 condos for about $500,000 apiece, you know. And
look at that.
But there was a lot of great connections. You know, my godfather, Joe Chancho, was there. He lived across the alley. And when I say alley, kids look at me, what's an alley, you know, and that type of thing. So it was great.
So what was your track? You know, you grew up, I know you played sports.
Right.
And then just pick it up, because it's a great life story. I was saying coach, but what happened?
Well, you know, I went to Mount Carmel, and that was from K through 9th grade. And then all of a sudden, it was 1969, the Archdiocese closed a lot of the Catholic high schools because of finances. And then we ended up moving in 1968, so I was in 8th grade. And I remember that very well. We were sitting in our house that night when Nixon got elected president.
Wow.
It's amazing, 8th grade, remembering that. And we were living up there in that area. But when the high schools closed, my parents, you know, I grew up blue collar.
Yeah.
And so
I know your folks.
And they were very fortunate they're still alive.
Yeah.
But they couldn't afford to send me, so I ended up going from a school of about 300 to Random High School, which was 2,000 at the time.
That's hard to do.
Yeah, it was. But fortunately, I was involved in athletics. I played sports and things like that. And all of a sudden, I'm getting ready to graduate in 1972, and I told my mom and dad I wanted to go to college. And I was the first in my family, so I went to Metro State. Yeah, we're alumni road runners. We're road runners.
Runners, man.
Yeah, we knew the white spot and the white mule very well down there.
Yeah.
But anyway, I thought I wanted to be an accountant because
I never knew that.
yeah, and so it was funny because I had a friend whose dad was a CPA, said, get your degree and everything's going to be great. You got a job. So I go down there. My parents said you can live at home as long as you're not on the 10-year plan. Sure. And so living at home and paying for my own college. Well, something that I realized early on is it's all about passion. And I can remember that when I went down there at the very beginning, first year I was taking general studies classes and some accounting classes, but that passion wasn't there. So I went back second semester, same thing. I said, I'm going to go back next year for my sophomore year. And I think I spent more time at the white spot than I did in classes, you know, and it went from 18
the
hours.
White mule or
yeah, well, both.
The white mule.
Well, I started out at the white spot for coffee in the morning, and then afternoon classes, we'd go over to the white mule.
Right down on the corner.
Yeah, it was, and I think it was Denver Diner now, and I think they closed since. Yeah.
That's right.
But anyway.
And then there was the Burger King, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the white spot, or then the white mule.
Exactly.
The
they
trifecta.
Right. We made the rounds. I didn't go to many classes, but I ate
but it was good.
well. Yeah, it was good.
That was good. That was good.
But anyway, I go back, and I said I'm going to give it one more chance. So I go back second semester of my sophomore year. I remember it so distinctly. The cost accounting professor comes in and said, now, class, you're going to have to subscribe to the Wall Street Journal. I said, no, we're not. I'm out of here. And I quit. And I was working for Shudos, which was right in the heart of North Denver. Sure. And they made me frozen food manager and making some good money, $5.25 back there in 19. Yeah, it was great. Yeah. But I didn't love what I was doing. So I had an uncle, Uncle Vito. And he said, yeah, it's real name, Uncle Vito. And he said to me, he said, Frankie, choose a job you love and you never have to work a day in your life.
There you go.
Love what you do and do what you love.
Yeah.
And I had a teacher and a baseball coach in high school, Chris Dittman. He was like a second father to me. And when I told him he was going to be an accountant, he said, yeah, we'll see. and all of a sudden I come back and he said, I knew you were going to be a teacher and a coach. And I remember going home and I had friends saying to me, God, why would you want to grow up in a state of poverty? And they weren't too far off. We're talking 1979 when I started at Columbine. I made $10,000 a year.
And you were coaching?
I was coaching 3 sports.
Yeah, right.
And so I couldn't even qualify for a house, so my parents had to co-sign. But you know what I tell people, Peter, which is so important, is when a kid comes up to you, I mean, I've been retired for 8 years, and kids come up to me and say, Coach D or Mr. D, and my wife, Diane, and I get invited 8 or 9 weddings a year. I mean, it's just, you can't put a price tag on that. And I feel I'm one of the richest people on the face of this earth. So it was the right choice.
How did you become principal?
Boy, that was my mentor, Ron Mitchell. He came up to me, it was about 1992, and I was loving what I was doing. I was teaching history, coaching football and baseball. I loved it. And he said, do you ever think of becoming an administrator? And I said, why would I want to become one of them?
It's like becoming a program director.
Exactly. Why? Yeah, I said,
yeah.
I love. But there was a dear friend of mine, Susan Peters, and we taught a class. It was called American Studies, and I taught the history part of it. She taught the literature part. Said, let me give you some advice. She said, your position is changing, but you don't have to change as a person. He said, you always speak from your heart. And think of the difference you can make. Now you're teaching 150 kids, you know, in your 5 classes, coaching some sports, but now all of a sudden you become the principal. You're in charge of 2,000 kids, 150 staff members, and continue to do what you're doing. And I made a promise when I decided to get into administration that I was never going to change that. You know, the thing that I did not like about my job is the meetings and all the paperwork, but I made a promise that I was going to spend time with the kids. I was one of the few high school, I loved cafeteria duty, because I got to be with the kids, you know, and so that was the one thing. And there were leaders that were much smarter than me, much taller than me, but as far as caring about my kids, that was my #1 priority.
And everybody talks about that terrible day, the 20th of April, 1999, and the wheels come off.
Yeah.
And I thought about this last night a lot, about how I was going to pursue this with you and how many times we sat and talked and how many stories you've told. And I thought, like with other things in the past, that we've done on the show, the Tancredo parts and stuff with Rich Wyatt, that gutted you.
Yeah.
And I met you in the aftermath of that. So I didn't know who you were. I remember your name was in the papers. People blamed you.
Yeah.
I mean, you were crushed. You were done. You got divorced over it. That maybe people don't know about that. You were taken down.
It was tough, something I was never prepared for, and I was in my third year, finishing my third year as principal, 20 years at Columbine, and the event happened, and something I was never prepared for. And I think the thing that hurt me the most is people thinking I was responsible.
Oh,
and again, and I'm not saying Columbine was perfect, but you know, one of the things that I have to live with for the rest of my life, and there were so many things. I encountered the gunman that day, but one of the things that, the reason I'm doing a lot of stuff I'm doing right now is because of an event that happened at Leawood Elementary. And all of a sudden, after I helped the police that day, they brought me down there, and it was considered the reunification center. And I'm in this little gymnasium, and all the families are there waiting for their kids to come. And as the night went on, there's fewer families, and then a father comes up to me and said, Frank, you know, for about the last 6 hours, there's been yellow school buses that have been here dropping off kids. What's going on? We haven't. And that's when grief counselor came up and said, Frank, you need to take these family members in a room and you need to tell them there's a good chance their loved ones are dead. And I remember walking into that room, and that was something I never was prepared for. I looked them in the eyes, and you don't know what to say. And it was just devastating.
I've always thought about that, the last bus.
Yeah. And it was just, it was tough. And those parents, and what do you say to them?
What time of night did they finally say to you, go in and talk? Because
it had to be about 8, 9 o'clock at night. Wow. And it was tough. And it was so difficult. And back then, it was chaotic because they did debriefing. So they brought all of the SWAT team members and officers down there. There's administrators, there's yelling, and parents, and media, and things of that nature. But I remember going in that room, and they just looked at me in shock, and there was officers saying, you need to fill out missing persons report. And they told the parents, and that was something.
I mean, apologies in advance. What did you say?
There was nothing I could say. We just held each other, and it was at
that.
They
knew?
Well, most of them knew they couldn't contact, and one of the things that will always stand out in my mind, it was Danny Rohrbaugh who died on the sidewalk, and how they confirmed there was a helicopter, and I think it might have been the Rocky Mountain News.
Or Channel 7, I think.
And all of a sudden, they did an air shot, and they saw their son lying dead, and that was tough. And so it was tough. And that night, I saw a teacher that had blood-stained shirt, and he was the one that actually dragged Dave Sanders into a classroom. So a lot of emotion. And I couldn't even go back to my house that night because the FBI were concerned because they were targeting me, and they didn't want my family there.
Plus, they had bombs still hidden out.
Peter, if those bombs would have went off, it would have killed 600 to 700 people. And you know, and when people say, well, they were bullied this, and I said, well, that was not the reason. And they're saying, well, how do you know that? They made these basement tapes, Peter. They made them for over a year, and I had to watch those tapes. It was one of the most devastating things I ever had to do.
We've talked about the tapes privately many times, and now they've been either suppressed or destroyed.
Right.
Are they destroyed, or are they just suppressed?
I think they're destroyed. When the sheriff at the time was John Stone.
Yeah, I know.
And then later Ted Mink came in, who just did a fantastic job. And I understand why he had to do it, because what ends up happening is if those tapes would have been allowed to be shown to psychologists, behavioral scientists, criminologists, it would have been great. But once they release them, then the media gets them. Mm-hmm. And there was so much information there that's really disturbing. And one of the things that we're learning, and it's sad, it saddens me that 22 years later, there are still kids.
We just had one happen.
Yeah. In Parkland, they were just talking about a kid was planning another Columbine, and these kids weren't even born. So the thing that haunts me is one of the last things in these videotapes, and I'll never forget this, is they're getting ready to come to Columbine. They have a camera on a tripod, and they're dressing, and they're saying, Mom and Dad, don't blame yourself. You're not bad parents. Quoting Shakespeare. Yeah. And all of a sudden he said, our legacy is going to live on forever. Yes. And all of a sudden the camera goes off, and they go to Columbine, and that was the last thing.
I've been able to see some things, and not all. when people say, how long did the tapes last? How many were they? And without giving it away, what did they say?
They basically, Harris idolized Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
I mean, and many people felt the reason they did it on the 20th was Hitler's birthday.
Absolutely.
But he basically, it was like listening to Adolf Hitler giving a speech. He talked about survival of the fittest and, you know, people that mispronounced words. Instead of saying espresso, if they said espresso, they deserve to die, they're sucking up air.
Yes.
You know, that type of thing. And then he also made reference, you know, the movie Charles Manson, Helter Skelter.
Yes.
And he said there's going to be a revolution between darky and, you know, and that type of thing. So he used a lot of that. And then Klebold on the other side was more of a, I think, more suicidal. But he, you know, the thing about it is I think the families really felt that he was brainwashed by Harris, but after watching those tapes, he was not. He was very complicit also.
There was always a good Eric, and,
yeah.
you know, no, I don't believe that.
But those tapes, and, you know, they talked about what they were going to do. And
would they have done it had they only done it alone, or did they need each other?
I think they needed each other because most of these school shootings are done by individuals.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, Harris did not move into the community until his 7th grade. And so he ended up, they connected in 7th grade because the Harris family, Mr. Harris was in the military. And so they connected.
He was a major, I think, in the Air Force.
And see, and the thing about it, and this was a narrative, a false narrative, because they came out and said these were at-risk kids and these were kids on the fringe. These were kids that were in gifted and talent classes.
Didn't he drive a BMW to school?
Yeah, he did. You know, Klebold. And as a matter of fact, it was about a month before he had got accepted to go to the University of Arizona.
Yeah, I know.
So he took his mom and dad there to look at dorm rooms. Everybody, you know, had no clue. And then Harris, as a matter of fact, tried to get in the military.
Tried to get in the Marine Corps.
Yeah, and he was
He was taking a drug or
right,
something.
for depression.
Maybe Luvox.
Yes, that's exactly what it was. And so he was not. But the thing that haunts me is it was 3 days, or actually Saturday before, they were at prom. And, you know, they're saying these at-risk kids, well, here's these kids, they're high-fiving me, they're dancing, they show.
Do you remember them coming up to you at the prom?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They came up and high-fived me. Klebold did. Now, Harris was not there because Klebold's date at that time was Robin Anderson.
That's right.
And she had purchased a weapon.
She went to the
Tanner Gun Show. Because she was 18.
Because she could buy a gun.
Yeah, and there was a loophole.
He had picked it out in advance.
Right. But then they also, you know, people purchased, and there's people saying, well, we need tougher gun laws. And one of the things that I pointed out, that they also purchased weapons illegally from 2 gentlemen that served jail time for selling. They had worked at Blackjack Pizza. Mark Manis and I'm trying to think of the others.
But it was Maines or Mattis or
right. Yeah. Mark Manis and I can't think of the other. But
they bought the shotgun and they bought ammunition. I'm trying to remember from him.
Right, and they bought them from them, and they actually went to Rampart Firing Range.
There's a video.
And that was haunting because when they purchased the guns, they went there, and I still remember there was a bowling pin on a tree stump.
Yes, I've seen it.
And they're firing that, and they're laughing, saying, "Can you imagine what that's going to be like when their brains explode?"
Yeah, no,
And I mean, just cold-hearted killers. And so, you know, those
test driving.
Yeah. And it was Duran and Mark Manis.
There we go.
And those were the 2, and they served jail time because they had worked. And what we found out later is they were actually exploding these pipe bombs on the roof of Blackjack Pizza over there by Columbine High School. And they had this complicated plan. They actually set off a bomb about 6 blocks from Columbine, got the police to go up there. And they put the bombs in the school, and then they even had such a complicated plan that they had their cars wired, that they knew when the police were going to show up, where the first, and their cars were going to explode, killing more. Yeah. But when the bombs didn't go off, that's when they came in the building.
I've thought about that moment, and I've met a number of the people that were involved in it, you in particular, but cops and, you know, media people and even survivors and parents, and you get to know people. You think about this moment comes when they green light and they're going to do it. And I think someone once said to me that they had planned it almost for a year.
Yeah. Those were in those tapes, and they were planning it in the basement of the Harris household, and they named their guns Arlene and the other, and and they referred to one as vodka. And what they would literally
vodka and Rebel.
Right, and that's basically what they did is they would be in the basement and they would be drinking Jack Daniels and talking about what they were going to do, and and that was the other thing. There was a narrative out there that they were targeting jocks. Well, I'm not an expert. When you put bombs in a cafeteria, you're going to kill as many people as possible. You're not discriminating against anyone. And I think when the bombs did not go off, that's when they started they walked into the library. But they knew where kids were sitting, and they put it down, so they did their homework.
One of the things that when that jock thing came up, and it wasn't you, I don't know, somebody, maybe Alan Pendergast, who's done great work.
Right.
He said, well, the jocks hung out in the gym. Where did they not go? Yeah. The gym. They went to the library that was full of easily hurtable people.
Right.
But they didn't go face their alleged enemy that the media said, oh, the jocks bullied them. And then Alan or someone said, well, why didn't they go there?
Well, and if they wanted to send a statement, there was a hanging trophy case. And that always, when I ran out of my office by that trophy case and they were firing bullets at me, it was full of all the state trophies. If you wanted to make a statement about athletics being dominant, they should have shot that case up. When they went through the office, and I had pictures of when I coached, I had state championships. If they wanted to make a statement, they could have shot all those pictures up. There was a coach across from mine who was the dean of students, and they did nothing. The only thing that they did shoot is my secretary had a computer, and on her screensaver, she had a Bronco emblem, but that was it. But, if they really wanted to make a statement.
What do you remember of the moment when it happened?
Well, it was, things happened that day that are I just can't explain, but it's kind of scary because usually out of 175 days, I was down in the cafeteria 170 days. Yeah. I was down there, greeting kids and cleaning tables and doing whatever. Yeah, exactly,
sure.
But that day I was late because there was a teacher who I'd interviewed the day before. He student taught. He was on a 1-year contract, so I was going to hire him. And to this day, he comes in my office. As a result, I'm late getting downstairs. To this day, I talked to him. I don't know if I ever offered him a contract, but he's still working there. Because before I could offer, my secretary comes in. She said, Frank, there's a report of gunfire. And I'm thinking, no. I mean, I've been at Columbine for 20 years. I can count on 2 hands the number of fistfights we had. Yeah. So I'm thinking we're a month away, senior prank, firecrackers, balloons. But then I come out of my office, and all of a sudden, it's hard to explain. I had never been in a situation like that, but everything slowed down. Yeah. And I thought I walked very calmly, and my secretary and Kiki, who went the other way to get kids, I sprinted right towards a gunman. And I've had police officers say, Frank, you're unarmed. Why would you sprint towards a gun? I had 20 of my kids that were coming out of a locker room, 20 girls that were coming out of a locker room to go to a class, and they were right in the crossfire. And back in the day, this is something that I think's interesting. The only drills we did prior to that were fire drills. Yeah. That was it. Yeah. When we were growing up, we did the shelter.
Duck and cover.
That type of thing. But that was it. But I knew if I got them into the gym, then there was an exit outside. And so everything was planned. The gunman was coming. The girls, I'm trying to keep them calm. Everything's going as planned. And I pull on the gym door. It's locked. Gunman's literally coming around the corner. Girls are screaming. Some are praying. I reach in my pocket, Peter. I had a set of about 30 keys. Reach in, first key, I stick in the door and open it on the first try.
Worked.
And I tried that for 15 years. I was never able to do it. And something that got pretty emotional about a few years ago, our girls' softball team was playing in the state championship game, and a lady comes up to me, and I recognized her. She was one of those girls with me, and she's crying, and I start crying. She said, turn around, Mr. D. You see that girl there in right field? If you didn't find the key that day, she wouldn't be playing in this game.
Was her daughter?
And I said, yeah, it's my daughter. And I said, I had very little to do with that key. And so once I got the girls inside, I locked them in an area because I needed to make sure it was safe to get outside. Because there was intel, there were some people working on HVAC. They thought they were snipers on the building.
I remember all of that.
And then there were some kids that came down in trench coats, and they thought so. The intel was so bad. So I said, I'm going back in. They covered me. I went back in, got the girls out, and I said, I got to go back. They said, no one's going in.
You were stopped from going back.
Yeah, I was stopped. And the police escorted me in. And at that time, they brought me over to the...
By the way, which of the two killers did you actually see?
It was Harris.
You saw him, and he crossed the T, right?
Yeah,
When
he
you
crossed,
saw him.
right, and he came, and one of the things that I have to live with, a lot of survivor's guilt, but what I found out later in talking to the police and the report, that if Dave Sanders would have stayed in the faculty lounge that day, I wouldn't be here. Because what happened is he was running upstairs, I mean, just saving kids. He's coming down the hallway, and as the gunman is running towards me, they spot Dave and stops momentarily, shoots him in the back of the head and continues to come after me. And then they dragged Dave in, and kids tried to save him. And unfortunately, by the time the paramedics got in, it was about 3 hours. And so I got out to help the police, and a lot of my buddies from North Denver were there. And that was one of the frustrating things, and there's been so many lessons learned because the protocol at that time was to secure the perimeter.
Stay out, yeah.
And there were police officers saying, here we are, we're sworn to protect and serve. And
we're killing people.
Yeah, and there were even some police officers who had their kids in there.
I know.
And so by the time the SWAT got there, it was about 58 minutes. And now police are immediately going in. Single officers are going in, paramedics are going in. But there was even a time, Peter, that they said, Frank, we know this is beyond the call of duty, but this fire alarm was so loud that they couldn't communicate on the radio. They're putting body armor on me to go in the building to shut it off, and then it came down. No one's going in that building. So those are all the things that happened.
How long were they? I've had this conversation with so many people. There comes an end, and they're back in the library. They return to where they did most of their killing happened in the library. And then they took their own lives.
Yeah. And they had enough ammunition that they could have engaged for 2 or 3 hours.
And they still had, I think they still had bombs
left.
Yeah,
and they had these bombs that were called crickets. And they're CO2 cartridges that they fill, and they were throwing them out. And people said, well, how could they carry hundreds? Were these crickets that they were throwing throughout the building.
They were test driving bombs.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But one of the things, and the same question that you just have been asking, I asked this psychologist. He said a lot of times it's almost like an animal who gets that first bite and draws that blood, and they have all this adrenaline going. And I think when they walked in, number one, the bombs didn't go off. And then they did the first shooting, and that adrenaline stopped flowing. And I think this is correct in assuming that the butt of the gun hit Harris in the nose, and he had a broken nose. And so because we had about 300 or more staff members and kids that were locked in this science wing, if they would have went anywhere in there, the death toll would have been even much higher. And so they lost the thrill to kill, and no one knows why.
When the Archbishop Chaput was here, I talked to him. I talked to so many different people. It ran out. Yeah. Something, whatever it was, happened. And they still had ammunition. And the cops were not in the building yet.
By the time they got there, I think they had taken their lives.
And they killed themselves.
And they went in there, and that was, when I went in that library about a month later, it was still a crime scene that was tough to witness.
Did one kill the other, or did they
kill? No, they killed themselves. Because there were so many theories out there that Harris killed Thibault, and then he took his own life, but I think the incident report shows that they took their own lives.
Why? Why'd they do it?
I don't know.
That's chased you. We've been best friends forever.
I know. I have no idea. I mean, these kids, and that's the thing that's so frustrating is they weren't. Now, I think if you talk to any educator, there's certain kids you look at and, you reach out for help saying, I'm concerned about some things. But these two, and there were some things, there was a hit list put out there that was turned in by one of the parents, and the police investigated, but there wasn't some follow through with that. But you look at it now, there's so many lessons learned from Columbine that they're doing that if we had things in place, and now there's threat assessments for schools, and you got all these drills.
Metal detectors,
things,
everything's different.
And the most important thing that I tell people is you could have metal detectors, you could have this, but also you have to have these kids in school that'll come forth. And there's things now, for example, in Colorado, there's called Safe to Tell, which is a 24/7 anonymous tip line. And so what ends up happening, because most of these shooters are broadcasting it. It's just like the gunman from Parkland.
Yeah.
There were so many things that he was broadcasting in pictures. Well, what happens if these kids see something, especially now with social media,
Sure.
they at least investigate to go check these homes and find out if they have the means to carry it out.
So then it's over. And you've told so many great stories about Bill Clinton coming to town and all the things that happened. And people talk about this, when somebody loses their life, and while there's a funeral and everything's going on, but then when it's over. And, we met in the aftermath of that, but it was, and then it's done, and now you're standing there all by yourself. Somebody once said, in the end, Richard Nixon was alone.
Yeah.
And in the end, you're alone.
Well, it was tough. I was getting so much advice from everyone, and one of the things I can remember being told, and I can't remember who told me, but they said, hey, you better be careful who you talk to. You don't want to talk to the parents, potential lawsuits. And this is a lesson I learned from my parents. Sometimes you have to stand up for what is right, even though you're standing alone. And it was on that weekend, it was Thursday, or Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, I went to all the homes of the families who had lost their child. And some families were living with relatives. And I didn't know what to say. We just held each other, we cried. And I said, we'll never forget. And I got a little bit of trouble. They're saying, we told you you can't do that. Well, I'm full-blooded Italian, and I'm stubborn.
What are you doing to me?
Yeah, and so it was a few weeks later I went back, and I brought flowers because it was Mother's Day. Right. And I went to visit those families and with flowers. And it was the right thing to do because now, 23 years or 22 years later, I have relationships. I call those families every April 20th, invite them back. This past year, it was healing for me because every year, a lot of times it goes to recording, but this year I think I spoke to about 10 families and we carried on conversations. The thing that got to me this year, it was Rich Patron and his stepson, Danny Rohrbaugh, was killed. And he said, Frank, he said, his birthday. I said, yeah, it's March 2nd. He said, he would have been 39 years old this year, and that really hit me hard. But it was, and one of the things, the school district, Jeffco School District, did such a great job of protecting me and keeping me, but I finally said, I need to face the parents because as a principal, you have those relationships. And when you have like management coming down, the relationships are not necessarily there. So
then the lawyers get in.
Well, and so I can remember there was a place called Ascot Center, was right over there where, and I met with the parents of the injured and the ones that were murdered, and I'll tell you, it was like having a big target on. And the first week, a few times they just yelled and screamed, but as time went on, and I said, I have nothing to hide and explain, we developed those relationships.
No, I watched it from afar, and we would go to the park because I was doing mornings on KHOW, and we would go, and I had not met you, and there were swirling is a word of rumors, and no one was sure. And this, although there had been school shootings before, this one so dominated everything. When Bill Clinton came.
Yeah.
That was.
He came a month after. It was May 20th, and we went over to Dakota Ridge, and prior to that, we met with the families over at Light of the World Church.
You told me he was incredible.
Oh, he was phenomenal. The First Lady was there, and he literally, I introduced him to all the families, and he sat down and carried on a conversation, a side that you don't see from a politician. And I spoke just before he did. And he came up to me, and it was really interesting because the Secret Service, he said, Frank, I want to mingle with the kids. Secret Service is saying, President Clinton, you got to go. And he was sincere. And he said something to me, he said, Frank, I'm not going away. He said, I'll help you every step of the way rebuild that community. And he did,
and
you told
me Wellington Webb. It was.
But he was just phenomenal. But, it was a tough journey. But, I got to say this, sitting here, this means a lot because you saved my career.
Don't do this one.
No, I got to tell you. And our lunch, I'll never forget it, was at 5280 in Littleton. And all I remember saying is just, let's talk, you and I. And if you feel the same way after that, then I'm fair game. And we met for about 3 hours, and something that I still remember because you made a comment and you said, boy, did he know his kids? And there was a young lady Beth Schumacher that
She was
came
his
up.
waitress.
Yeah,
I told the story.
And she comes up and she's hugging me. And I said, well, how's your brother Steve doing? How's your mom and dad? And you said, oh my gosh.
I mean, I remember that moment for whatever that's worth. And I don't know how, there was somebody else, you had a PIO or somebody.
Oh yeah, Rick Kaufman.
That listened.
Yeah.
And he called me, and I remember, I don't know who, Sheik or somebody, and he said, you want to have lunch with DeAngelis? And I went, hell yeah, I mean, he's in the eye of the storm. And I remember meeting, and I've told this story thousands of times, many times, and not in this kind of a setting where anybody can. Yeah. But this woman comes over, and she had gone to Columbine. And you and I are sitting there, and we're talking, we're connecting about growing up in, semi-tough neighborhood and ethnic neighborhoods. And she was all about you. And I'm thinking, who the hell is this guy? Because, you had so many friends that we were mutual friends with who said, no, he's getting a raw deal. And then we're there for like noon to 3 o'clock.
Exactly, it was great.
And I remember walking out and said, come to the radio show.
And you made me a promise. You said, come to the radio show. We're not going to take any calls. So we're doing the show, and I don't know if you remember this. So all of a sudden, the producer's knocking on the window doing this. He said, no calls. He said, you want to take this? And a father comes on, and he said, Frank, or Mr. D, I just want to thank you for saving my daughter. She was with you in the gym. And I mean, the producer, we're all crying.
I remember it so well. So it's a powerful moment. And then we become buddies, and more than friends, brothers. And to go out on a positive note, as a single guy and having been through, and you went through a divorce in the aftermath, but the most wonderful story is the letters. And you lucked out. I mean, I'm having lunch with these guys, and we do the, we have a name for it, I better not use it. But we're sitting there, and it dawned on me, there's 3 guys with great marriages. Gary and Michelle was a wonderful, Gary DeFrange. Without Jackie, Tom Tancredo was done. I mean, and he sat there and told the stories. And but you lucked out. Please, I don't know how much, or if you've ever told that story.
Well, I was married for 18 years, and I remember coming home, and, I got into counseling pretty quickly. Yeah. And a friend of mine, my mom worked for him, he's a Vietnam veteran, and he said, I never got the help I needed. You need to get help. Yeah. Well, I tried to get my wife to come in, and she said, no, you're the one screwed up, I'm not. She said, you're not the man I married. And so we stayed, I was married 18 years, so it was 2002. And I get served, I'll never forget this, I'm in my office, and the sheriff comes in and says, Frank, can we talk? And he said, no, in your office. And I got served with divorce papers. So I was struggling. We're getting ready for the 3-year anniversary. Well, prior to that, probably right after Columbine, had about 2,000 or 3,000 letters, and I'm a pretty type A person. I was going to read 25 each. Well, there were some good ones, but Peter, there were ones saying, you killed those kids, how do you live with yourself, you should have died, and this type of thing. So counselor said, stop reading. So I'm in my divorce, we're going through my divorce, I'm at the house, and I pull out these letters. The first one I pulled out was from my high school sweetheart, Diane Wethington. And she said,
Tell the story why she was no longer your high school sweetheart.
I was an over-possessive Italian, we're going to get married, or not. Yeah. Well, my parents loved her so much that she invited them to her wedding, and my parents went.
And she married another guy.
Yeah, another guy, and he worked for the police department. So we lived in Colorado. We hadn't seen each other for 30 years. So she sends me this letter. Frank, I don't know if I said, you're my first love. I mean, she was 15, I was 16. Now, the funny thing is, today, I don't know if I'd have been able to call her because we have everybody's phone numbers plugged in. I didn't. I remember her mom's number, 303-428. So I called it and I said, Mrs. Wethington, this is Frank D. Oh, how are you? And I said, Diane sent me a card and I apologize. It's been 3 years and I just want to thank her. And I said, can you give me...
So the card was 3 years old. This is the important part of the
that was the important part because she sent it in April of '99. I called her in January of 2002. Mom picks up, living in the same house, said, well, I don't want to, let me just give her, Diane, your number. She calls me, And I'll never forget it because I was carrying the Olympic torch for the Olympic, and it was such a moving day because they had Patrick Ireland, who was a boy in the window, and he passed it on to me. And then I walked by Columbine, and then John Tomlin, whose dad was killed, we walked by. Well, that afternoon I get home, it was a very emotional day. I get this call from Diane. And it's like we start talking, and we talked, and we didn't even see each other until her dad passed away. And I saw her for the first time in April, and there was an instant connection, and we've been together.
How long before you were married?
Well, here's the thing we tried to do. My mother-in-law, and she was like Mother Teresa, and she said, "You really need to be married in the Catholic Church." And so, that type of thing, and we were going to go through the annulment. Well, that whole process took a long, long time. And so we ended up, we were together, we got married in, I need to make sure, 2013, so we've been together. But we've been together, it'll be this coming January, it'll be 20 years. And she's just... And the thing...
She's the best, too.
She is. And the thing I like about her, I love about her is she's my biggest support system. And a lot of times, people, she gives me this hard time. Everybody just tells you what you want to hear. And she's honest with me, and I turn to her in things like this. And
there's nobody better.
And I got to be honest, Peter, when you go through tough times, you look at different ways to cope. And for me, I did get into counseling, but there were nights it was very easy for me to go down in the basement and get a glass of whiskey. And Diane, it was early April, and she saw I was spiraling a little bit, going through the divorce, the 3-year anniversary, and she could just tell because I was hanging up on the, I gotta go, I'll talk to you tomorrow. And she basically said, I know what's going on, and if you don't stop this, we're finished.
You may not, and that's what's great about the shoots. You called me one night, and you were the furniture was gone. You remember that phone call?
Yeah, I do.
And we weren't who we are now, but we were getting there. And you were alone with the furniture's gone.
And I had the dog.
And the mutt was with you.
I had the golden retriever, Maggie.
And I've told people that stories, or I've told many people, but there's nothing to sit on.
Yeah, the divorce didn't go well. I had I had a plate, I had the dog. and literally I was going down in the bay. I mean, I was struggling, served with papers. The 3-year anniversary was coming up. I was named in 8 lawsuits, and I was struggling. And Diane saw through it, and she said, I know what's going on. And she said, you better stop.
I always tell everybody, like when you're front running, when you got this morning show and you're doing, and everything's great, and you're skiing, and you're like, it's when you're on your can.
Yeah.
Is when you find out who your friends are.
Yeah.
And that's in my life, a couple things happen and you go like, who's calling you? Yeah. And when I got canned at Cahow, I think you were the second phone call. And you said, hey. I'm surprised you weren't there when it happened, Tancredo was. But, and this, your marriage, I know, like I threw a 75th birthday party when I turned 75, and I invited everybody in the inner circle, people I loved, and everybody was there. And you and Diane came, and it was like, it was a night.
She's great, and just a little story, our engagement, and when we were in high school, we had a little area we'd go park.
Sure.
Well, so we're there, so all of a sudden we go to her mom's house for Christmas Eve, and all of a sudden we're going a different way, and she said, what's going on? So I went to where we used to park, and we listened to a song, Oh, How Happy by Michael Jackson.
Sure, of course.
So that was our song back in the day. So all of a sudden, I plug that in, and that song comes on. I go to the back, and I pull out a teddy bear with the ring and engage. And
who's better than you?
And she just started, and it took us back, and I said, thank you for being with me. We were meant to be.
I know no one better. I mean, I know a lot of people, and they have this group of people that I know that I could always call, and Frank DeAngelis. And now, with a week ago Sunday, we're standing on the stage together for MC1, and it dawned on me that here, me and you old guys, and Jeff's there, and I said, the sadness is that somebody else is going to be standing here. Yeah. There's going to be some other guy and some other guy because of what's happened to law enforcement You're a big, strong supporter. You're probably, not probably, you are the reason why Emily's parade happened. You came like the wind. Now when things happen, you're on the airplane and you go to these events and you bring this calm and this knowledge. So I guess as we walk out, you know, neither one of us are kids. What's the lesson?
Well, I think the legacy is, number one, you know, it's something that stands out. Again, my faith is important, but I went down and for the first time after tragedy, I was questioning my faith. Yeah. I said, God, how could you allow this to happen? I mean, I saw a kid with his face shot off, people lying in pool blood. Priest calls me down and very close to the Archbishop, and he called me down on the altar. There was about 1,200 people there, and he whispered, he said, you should have died that day, but God's got a plan. And he quoted Proverbs 16:9. He said, in his heart a man plans a course, but the Lord determines your steps. And he said, he's going to be there and you're going to be kicked down, but he's going to pick you up. And he said, you have a platform that you can go out and help. And it's not that I'm special, but I can go out and say, when I called like Parkland or I called the people at Sandy Hook, I said, I know what you're feeling. They do. Emily's, exactly. Yeah. I went up there and met with John Michael and Ellen Keyes. And, you know, and right now I told the police, and you and I do so much work for the police, and I just, what a lot of them are going through right now is not right. And we're going to stand up. But I truly believe we're planting the seed.
On Sunday. You said it's all wrong.
And you know what was nice when I made that comment is just the applause. That's what they need. And you know, and I told them not to dwell because on the negative, and it's tough not to, but there's so many positive things going on. And I really believe that when we are no longer doing it, the legacies, hopefully they're going to say we planted this.
It's going to, what did Frank, you said it and Jeff said it, and because the need is going to be there. It doesn't matter if it's me and you, but the need's going to be there.
It's going to be there, and hopefully we continue it because I do think we've made a difference.
All right, make me a promise. We will have you and Frank and Gary in this room.
Oh, Tom?
I'm sorry, Tom. You, Tom, and Gary. And we'll get some food.
Oh, yeah.
We'll have lunch.
Yeah.
And the lunch stories are so good. And the lunch rules are only, we have two rules to lunch. You can interrupt anybody anytime you want, and you can talk with your mouth full. This is Frank DeAngelis, nobody better, to Dr. McCallan again. You've underwritten all of this operation that we've done with Mark and setting all of this up, and there's a crawl with all of her information. Change your life. Give Dr. McCallan a call. This is episode 5 of The Shoot. Each time they just get better, and this is a home run. I'll see you the next morning, 5 a.m. on the radio station, 710 KNUS. Thank you.